All right, so let's go over grades. So let's start introducing what cells are and why they're so important for in biology. Because this is where we're going to start putting everything together, right? From here we go into different units, but everything goes back to the cell and prokaryotes, eukaryotes, right? Remember that in order for an organism to be considered living, it needs grace, right? We said grace. It needs to grow. It needs to reproduce. It needs to adapt. More importantly, it needs to have cells. It needs to be made up of cells, and it needs to be able to either produce or utilize energy. All right, so we talked about this in class, and we went into a lot more specific or more details in each letter, but this is the review. Growth. It needs to grow, reproduce, adapt. It needs to have cells, and it needs to be able to produce or use energy. Cells, remember, that are the basic building blocks of life. Okay, they're made up of all kinds of organic molecules, especially biomolecules. We just talked about the four main biomolecules, or the molecules of life, which are carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and nucleic acids. Right. The structure of a cell equals its function. So, if you look at the picture here, we talked about red blood cells and white blood cells. The reason red blood cells, okay, look kind of like a donut is because they need that, and they don't have a nucleus. Remember that. It's the only eukaryotic cell that has no nucleus. It's like that because it needs to carry oxygen right there. So it carries oxygen to your body. Okay. White blood cells, on the other hand, they have a nucleus, and they're responsible for destroying or taking care of our immune system. Okay. Or taking care of us because through our immune system. Okay. Again, the structure of a cell always determines its function. Okay, and that's where That's where cells getting their job comes in. Remember that when an organism is being created or is developing, okay, everything develops from stem cells, right? When fertilization happened for us, right, we start from a stem cell, and then those stem cells or unemployed cells eventually get a job. Some of them are going to become muscle fiber cells, some red blood cells, some nerve cells, like neurons or brain cells, right? And they're going to have specific jobs. Everything has their job, right? But they're all came from the same stem cell. That's why a nerve cell and a blood cell and a piece of our, or just a hair, one of our hairs, have the same DNA inside of them, right? So all of our cells have the same DNA. It's just that they have different jobs or different functions. Okay, but they all come from the same stem cell, so they're going to have the same DNA. Okay, and that's what cell differentiation is. This is just mature cells that are specialized. Okay. Remember that the structure, the size and shape equals the function or the role that they perform in the organism. Okay, and that's what cell differentiation is. Going from a stem cell to the actual cell that you're gonna be, or that it's going to be in our bodies, and having that shape, specific shape, so that it can perform its function, like the red blood cell here and the white blood cell that we just talked about a minute ago. Okay, the fat cells, you can see how big they are, and they have all this storage where they store fat, right? That's their job, that's their function. So they are going to be big in order to store all these energy or fats. Okay, nothing like a red blood cell. Neurons or brain cells, you can see it. They look completely different than a fat or a blood cell, but they're like that because their function requires this type of structure. Their structure equals their function. Remember that. Okay. Now axon, you can see everything. Well, actually, I think we had one of these questions in one of our quizzes. Okay, but the terminals here, that's where the signals are going from, right? So this is the nucleus. It has a nucleus. It's a eukaryote, so it came from a eukaryotic organism, which is us, right? And then all the information goes to the terminals or the axons. We don't need to get into all the details about the cell, but what I want you guys to understand is that The reason it looks the way it looks is because that's what's required in order to function properly or to do its job. Okay, just like the fat cells are huge in order to store energy, neurons need to look like this in order for them to perform their jobs. Okay, we talked about levels of organization, and we said how the atoms that are involved in biology, or what makes up our biomolecules, are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Okay, and then or chomps, right? CHONPS. We didn't talk about sulfur, but CHONP, right? And then those make up biomolecules, which are fat, sugars, proteins, which are enzymes, and then nucleic acids, DNA, and RNA. Okay, and then we talked about different organelles, right? Organelles are very important for us to know. Are chloroplasts, which are responsible for creating glucose in plants. Okay, they go through photosynthesis happens in the chloroplast, and the product of that process is glucose from the sun. Right, they convert it. They convert CO2, water, and they use the sun to convert it to glucose. Then the mitochondria, where that glucose is actually broken down into ATP, and that happens. That's very important for us. Well, all living organisms, but especially for us, because that's the only type of energy we can use, ATP, that molecule, right? And we get the energy out of that molecule by breaking the bonds. Then you also have a nucleus, which controls everything in the cell, and the ribosomes, which are responsible for making proteins in our cells. Okay, cells, we talked about animal cells, bacteria cells, plants, fungal cells, protists. Okay, we said some of them are prokaryotic, some of them are eukaryotic. Okay, and we said that prokaryotic cells are very, very, very small compared to eukaryotics. They do have ribosomes, okay, because everything needs to make proteins. Remember, proteins are very important to staying alive. They reproduce through binary fission, are unicellular, meaning they're made up of one cell, okay. And examples are bacteria, archaebacteria, bacteria is cyanobacteria. We actually looked at that in our lab. And archaebacteria we didn't, but that's just another type of bacteria. They live in very extreme environments. Okay, and then eukaryotics, which I don't have the slide here, but eukaryotic cells, we talked about how they have a nucleus, they have organelles. Different types of eukaryotic cells are plants, animals, fungus, and protists. And the biggest thing is having a nucleus. Okay, they do have a ribosome, and they do make proteins, but the biggest thing is that they do have a nucleus, so we're able to differentiate between a pro and a U. Okay, all right, I'm gonna make another video to go over cellular processes, but this is just the introduction for cells. Okay.